Hello and welcome to episode 27 of Subplot A Course, a podcast discussing a new science fiction work on the second Tuesday of every month. I'm Charlie, and I'm Stavros, thinking of the person I have to introduce first. And with me is someone...
Is Charlie okay?
I think we'll find out soon. But Charlie is someone who will now explain time travel by using mathematical formulas.
I mean... Yeah,
Do
sure,
it
why not?
now.
Hey,
Dance monkey.
this episode will be much longer if I have to actually explain time travel and its possibilities. Just go listen to some Neil deGrasse Tyson episodes where he talks to Professor J. Richard Gott. They'll explain it. It'll be
You
great.
are the budget. You are budget Neil deGrasse Tyson. Come on.
That's not true in any sense. Like,
Why are you
my
always
budget-
passing the buck, Charlie?
Anyway, Charlie teaches math. And also with me is Vincent, who is researching the effects of totally bogus time travel on populations. Say hi, Vincent.
It makes people very, very upset when they're forced to read books about totally bogus time travel. Depression rates skyrocket. I think Stavros, are you okay?
I think we'll find out. But Vincent is an epidemiologist. And also with us is Adrian, who teaches the basics of time travel to his students on the first day of class. Say hi, Adrian.
Feeling bad about the elephant that died to make that time machine right now.
Yeah, it's
Wait,
true.
what?
We'll get to that. We'll for sure get to that. And Adrian is an English literature PhD candidate and teacher. And finally, joining us for the first time in a while is John, who will literally be building a time machine for us while we record this episode. Say hi, John.
And hey, what's up? I'm going to do it better than anyone you've ever seen before. I'm telling you.
I mean, you're going to do it so well that people don't know that we recorded all of these episodes next week, actually, and then just sent them back.
This episode brought to you in the future.
So we can procrastinate even more than we do all
Yes.
that.
And John is just started. John's an engineer. And today,
Here.
yes, that's true. And today we're going to be talking about The Time Machine, if you didn't get that already, by all the time travel things. Written by H.G. Wells and published in 1895. And if you're listening to this, you should be prepared for spoilers.
You've already read this book. Come on.
I hope so. But I'm going to go through the plot anyway. The book begins with a weekly dinner hosted by a time traveler in Victorian England. The time traveler shows off a small model of a time machine after dinner one week. And the next, the dinner group is interrupted by the time traveler again as he appears halfway through the meal looking haggard. He indulges the group in a tale about his use of his newly constructed time machine. He took the time machine forward in time to the year 802,701. Very specific. Apparently the dials went up that far. Where he had met a peaceful race of humanish people he dubs the Eloi. The Eloi appeared to be a peaceful race, though dumb and uninteresting, because, perhaps even more concerning though, is that while he was visiting the Eloi, someone had stolen his time machine. He explored around and found a vaguely sphinx-like statue that he is maybe hiding his time machine or is somehow involved, as well as rescues an Eloi woman named Weena, with whom he develops a very strange relationship, which I think we'll talk about later. He also discovers tunnels that lead below ground, where he discovers another race, the brutal troglodyte Morlocks. And after a confrontation with the Morlocks at a conveniently still standing museum where the time traveler finds some matches, he proceeds to start a huge fire in which a bunch of Morlocks and Weena are likely killed. He then purposefully falls for a trap where the Morlocks open the Sphinx and show him the time machine, and he gets on and escapes. And from there he goes into the extremely distant future where there are crazy crab monsters and huge butterfly monsters. And then he even goes even farther and just sees the end of the Earth. And then he returns just in time to run into the dinner party and then explain to his guests what happened to him for 5 hours, which is the length of the audiobook. The next day, the time traveler goes on another time traveling trip, but he doesn't come back from that. Very sad. So, jumping right in here, the narrative device where basically the entire book is communicated to us by the time traveler goes on this trip and then comes back and he's like, I just got back and I was nearly killed and now I'm going to explain it to you for a while. Does that work for you guys? Did you enjoy that kind of narrative device?
Listen, I think it's kind of creative. I think it's okay. It sets up the tone of the story as kind of an unreliable first-person narrative, in that the guy is like, I'm going to tell you the story. I came back from a hard time. Kind of bear with me if it doesn't quite all make sense. It does seem a little bit odd that like nobody's going to interrupt him for what seems like 20 hours, because that's how long it took me to read this book.
Just how compelling the story is, Vincent.
But yeah, I think it's okay. I mean, it fits in with the 1800s kind of writing style. I guess maybe my one gripe about it is that I hate to make excuses for books. This is a great book, conditional on the fact that you know that it was written in the 1800s. Like, I want the book to be a good book regardless. So it does irk me a little bit, the writing style, because it just doesn't seem as plausible. I guess maybe I'm stacking against modern fiction, where there seems to be much more complexity in terms of how tales are told. But it's very good for the time.
Oh, it just feels like a caricature of an 1800s book. It's just, I would not sit at a dinner party if somebody came in disheveled and said, I'm going to eat. You guys are all going to listen to my story, ask no questions for 4 hours while I regale the story to you.
Yeah, I mean, it's clearly a narrative device. Like, he's using that as an excuse to tell the story. I don't know if it's really supposed to be.
No, John, we do this all the time. Basically, he's giving free dinner to these people. He's basically the guy selling you like a bank account or something like that. It's like, come, free steak dinner, but you have to listen to our pitch for 4 hours and maybe buy my time machine too. And people are like, okay, yeah, free dinner. Okay, yeah, 4 hours. Okay, no big deal. Do I get like a ticket to a timeshare or something like that?
It should be called the timeshare, is what you're saying.
Timeshare, exactly. The timeshare machine.
Okay, I mean, and then this whole recounting of the tale, especially at the dinner party, he does something similar, which we last saw in the book Annihilation, where there are some names in there now and again, but like a lot of people at the dinner party are just kind of have titles. Like there's like the newspaper guy and the medical guy, and like the local government guy and like the young upstart guy. How'd you guys feel about that? It kind of, I mean, it is fairly short book, so it kind of keeps you focused on like maybe what we should be paying attention to, which is the status. Like there are these very well-to-do white British people at this party who are like definitely contributing to his conversation. But how'd that affect your guys' enjoyment?
I think my book had a foreword, and it actually talks about this. Like the point is that they're all kind of caricatures of points of views, or that's like people of the day. So it's not so much that they're actually characters as it's like, oh, look at me kind of take a couple of jabs or kind of summarize real fast what I think of kind of this viewpoint or that viewpoint or this position or that sort of thing.
Interesting. Adrian, do you have the context of it? Is this a common device or is this pretty unusual?
I mean, I don't know if I'd call it common. I think from like just like a writing perspective, I understand that reading, like it makes some sense, but no character except for the time travel is there enough for a critique to kind of fully form, right? Like most of these characters only speak for maybe 2 or 3 lines essentially, right? And maybe they're described by like a full paragraph. So if there is a kind of critique of these individuals, it's kind of hard to pin it down, right? And given the larger context of the novel in terms of its potential critiques of the way that industrialization is happening in England, the way that empire is happening in England, like it's kind of confusing to think about it in those terms.
Sure, yeah, it's definitely all in context because newspaper guy is perhaps more important then than maybe today, for example. Okay,
well, not important enough to get a name.
Apparently not. All right. Well,
time machine guy doesn't even get a name either. It's very strange in that.
Yeah, kind of strange. Speaking of the time travel, I mean, this guy is he flies off the handle really easily. I mean, granted, he's under a lot of stress, considering he's living with crazy Morlocks that want to eat people and stuff like that. But this guy kind of flies off the handle. But even this guy is very important to the plot. No name. I think even the main character, whose role I can't even remember now after reading the book. All I know is he's at the dinner party for some reason. Even he does not get a name. Very sad.
Nameless. I don't know how they would make this into a play or a movie without giving anybody's names or descriptions or.
I mean, they shot a movie for Annihilation, and they didn't have any names.
That's true.
Is the only character with an actual name, like the main character's name gets mentioned like twice or so, or the narrator's name, not the main character? And like Weena, are those the only named characters in the book, or is there like a third or a fourth?
The maid is named. There's also Philby is named. So there are a few characters that are named that are not.
Right. I think that one is the main character.
They're all very minor.
again, this is why it's so confusing. Like, you would expect, like, if this is supposed to reduce people down to their functions, why wouldn't the maid, who is probably like the most functional character of that set, why would she have a name, while everyone else doesn't?
Well, I think because isn't she the only one talked about? Like, anyone he talks about in his story gets a name, like the maid and the narrator briefly. But in terms of the narrators telling, nobody gets a name, right?
Yeah,
I guess he doesn't speak, so that's true. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely few and far between.
Speaking to the character, the time traveler, he's kind of engineerish, I'm gonna say. Obviously he's building machine, he's tinkering, he obviously has mechanical skills. Does not make engineers look very good because he's like horrendously violent and short-tempered and just like
I know, right?
Not very caring.
I mean, this is 1800s England. He's like, I was attacked by subhuman cannibal people. I felt pity for them as I murdered them, and then realized maybe I shouldn't bother because even that is sad. It's
Very
like,
British.
oh, England.
Not entirely clear how he knows that Weena is a female, because he makes mention that like the two genders look essentially the same in this. Right?
Very androgynous. Yeah.
Let's not forget, Weena is supposed to be quite young. It's like much younger than him, like juvenile almost, I think.
Or is she just like weird fat baby people? Because that's how I kind of describe the Eli. Like sad baby people, children things.
Yeah.
Things are getting very disturbing very
Odd.
fast.
It's getting very odd.
Time traveler, because we'll get to Weena, I'm sure. We'll talk about her a lot.
Yeah.
We're still, in recent memory, we still have these gentleman scientists, right? Like these zoologists who hire people to go out to Africa and shoot, endangered species and bring them back home to be studied, right? Like that's kind of the level of scientific inquiry that we're dealing with here.
Yeah, that's very true.
Yeah, there's kind of a safari aspect to this, to be honest. Some type of like, go improve yourself, go out to the new world and bring back stories of weird and unusual and exciting cultures and experiences.
Yeah, like the weird colonist adventurer type story type deal.
Yeah, that's literally what happens, right? He goes to the place and murders a few dozen people and then comes back and he's like, I did it.
Let's not forget, he completely disrupts their entire society, almost single-handedly ruining the very delicate balance, which he goes into great detail about. The delicate balance of their society, he completely throws into chaos.
I mean, for like 2 days, I'm sure after the woods burn, it's literally exactly the same till humanity dies.
I just assume that, like, basically all of the Earth is one big tinderbox, and he just burned down the entire world.
He doesn't even leave London in the whole book. Like, they're just... That's the one thing I'm like, is only England like this? Knowing how England is, maybe. But my favorite thing is how he talks about all the weird science. It's like, we eliminated bacteria. And nowadays, with science, it's just like, I feel like that would be a bad thing.
Let's focus on the future. So to give a little bit of background to refresh everyone, so there's the Eloi and the Morlocks, obviously, and then he makes these like crazy, horrible hypotheses about what exactly is going on in the future based on like 1 day of observation.
That's my favorite part of the unreliable narrator thing is he's just like, well, it had to have been this, and you're like, really? Like, that's clearly H.G. Wells' intentions, like his way of telling you that's what happened.
Yeah.
But it's still hilarious where I'm just like, why don't the Morlocks just eat the fruit like everyone else?
Meat.
Yeah, they're meat eaters. But yeah,
so you can't not have your meat if you're working on your machine down in the tunnels.
Yeah, I mean, he basically, the author implies that by the end of the time traveler's journey, he basically has like the most correct explanation, where like the Eloi are like farm animals and the Morlocks are like the evolution of the underclass industrial worker, like working on their machines underground and then coming up and murdering Eloi and eating them every so often. But I mean, on the whole, because of this crazy lens, I had the same problem where I'm listening to him make these hypotheses. I'm like, oh my god, and it comes out that he's wrong. I'm like, okay, good. Maybe he'll like learn like how to make better hypotheses, and he comes out with a better one. I'm like, oh my god. But anyway, so like assuming that the most recent one is what actually H.G. Wells intended for the interpretation of this world to be. Did you guys buy this as a plausible depiction, or can this only be viewed through the lens of, hey, we're like making critiques about 1895 England?
No way. I don't think that this could possibly be plausible. When his final assumption about what's going on in this future society assumes some balance whereby the people are cattle and they're only taking a few at a time. Since when have human beings ever been able or capable of being moderating themselves like that? Last time I checked, we're burning fossil fuels at a rate that is damaging the planet, and we're not really doing much to prevent that. So I just think that the society would tend towards some type of chaos without the intervening factor of reason or knowledge, and it does not appear that any of the people who are here are particularly sophisticated in knowledge or planning. If anything, they're devoid of that upper level of
that was one of the updates to the film in the 2000s, was that the Morlocks basically would exhaust the Eloi and take over the whole planet because they are the consumers.
Huh. Okay, so the movie kind of expands on that and makes the Morlocks more scary. They're not just like farmer folk. They're like
well, because they have like brainy overlords, like people who control that, like super Morlocks, basically.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I do like. I know, like one of my previous comments, especially when we started the podcast, was like 1970s problems, because like all the sci-fi is like we're gonna run out of food by 2005, and it's funny reading that now. It's like, oh my god, everyone's starving. Whereas this is the 1890s version of, look at the upper classes becoming detached nitwits, and the lower class is just becoming sad, thoughtless machines.
So I will step in and say that even though like the exact scenario that is proposed here is relatively unlikely, there was one theory that he had which seemed to resonate with me a little bit more. And the theory was more that as technology gets better, people will get lazier. And as they get lazier, you're more likely to become like an Eloi, because you don't have to do, strenuous hunting, gathering, because you've created machines to do all sorts of stuff for you. So it's kind of like, can we get fat and lazy in the future if technology gets better? Hell yeah. I mean, Amazon delivers most of my packages. I barely even go to the store anymore. So if you extrapolate that kind of argument to the fact that, like, I think it's almost kind of caricatured in, like, there are a couple of movies, like WALL-E, the Pixar movie. It's like, oh, people just got fat and lazy because technology did everything for them. It's not that far off from WALL-E, in a WALL-E world where, like, people are just fat. They're sitting around in the lap of luxury. People bring them food. They do jack shit. And
then they get
frankly,
eaten.
I think there are a lot of people who kind of believe that, even nowadays, given the WALL-E example.
I mean, I was about to say, isn't this actually today with celebrity culture? We have a bunch of people with these completely out of context lives that we just feed off of meaninglessly to give our sad, pointless lives meanings as we toil.
Is Charlie okay?
That's really cynical, Charlie. Oh my gosh.
You talking about yourself, Charlie?
Jesus.
to ignore the past 35 seconds or so.
Okay.
That perspective was really very much in the air at the time that Wells was writing. That we're at the height of the British Empire, right? Like the Victorian Empire spans the globe, and at the same time, right, Great Britain has one of the smallest standing armies, has the smallest standing army of any of the great European powers. Like by the time that World War I rolls around, and what would that be? 15 years from the time this book is written, right? Austria has over 1 million men, Germany is over 2 million, and Great Britain has like 140,000 people in their army. 5 years from the point that this book was written, the Second Boer War occurs, and the British win against these European colonists in South Africa, but it's a really, really hard battle, and they do this massive reevaluation of their military might, and they sort of realize that they believe that the urbanization of their culture, right, is leading to these kind of like shriveled up weak men who don't exist out in the countryside anymore, where they're getting strong, lifting hay and tending animals, right? That
Sure.
The city life is making them weak, right? And that becomes a fairly kind of common theme that we hear all the way throughout, up to the Second World War. Like that there are German philosophers like Ernst Jünger who is kind of talking a lot about how pain is a way to enhance the spirit, right? That in the absence of pain, we are just we are living in a situation where there's no resistance and therefore no advancement.
Sure. Basically, your argument is that this is definitely a product of the times, essentially, right? Like this is a lens into, how the world was in 1895.
like, I think it accounts for how confusing the critique is, right? Because on the one hand, right, it's celebrating a kind of Britishness because, as we were talking about before we recorded here, right, like the height of civilization seems to really kind of be when the time traveler's time period, right? That he is the most intelligent character. That this story doesn't really differ all that much from, you know, like a native encounter story that you would find in a boys' magazine at the time, you know. These stories about like these brave British colonists, because again, like we're at the height of the British Empire, so the only understanding of like the frontier where over there is, right, is some backwater uncolonized location that is full of Aboriginal peoples, right, or natives essentially, right, and that's what we see in the Eloy and Morlock.
Yes, definitely true. But I mean, the main thing, for at least for me, is this viable as a future? You know, looking back at this book written such a long time ago for us, and I could definitely see the lens of the time, but man, was a roadblock for me personally, at least, like seeing this as viable, you know, as a potential feature for us. But what I do want to bring up though is that, I mean, this book essentially set a lot of trends as far as time traveling stories went. I'm sure that there are some exceptions to this, but by and large, you know, the concept of traveling time and of time machines in general were not very, very well used in science fiction at the time. So does the fact that this book did a lot of trend setting as far as time traveling goes, does that help this book's case?
One of the things I find interesting is just the fact that we still use the term time machine. It's not like we call spaceships space machines. Like, it's probably make more sense in English to call it like a time ship or something like that. Just the fact that these terms and kind of the idea of being able to come back and forth seems to originate with this novel.
So let's talk a little bit about why you're so defensive about this right now.
What? I was just saying, like, in terms of like the name and that sort of stuff. Like,
yeah, no, I totally agree. But for full disclosure, you know, this was Charlie's suggestion, and it is, to be fair, it is a classic. I mean, it does set a lot of these trends, but just saying, maybe.
So listeners out there, if you want to validate and be on Charlie's side, send your votes in now. 1-800-TIME MACHINE.
Even I am going to admit that this is not like the most finely written book. It's like how much when I read the foreword and I was like, I hope everyone's in for weird allegory about socialism and capitalism. Also I remember seeing like the 1950s movie, which is straight up the book, and just being like, what? As a child, I was like, you know what, this will be fun to read again, and be completely disappointed by once again. And I was not disappointed by
your lack of disappointment.
No.
This is how Charlie entertains himself, like being disappointed.
Sounds about right.
Oh, jeez.
Oh, I think I said, like, in the beginning of the book that I totally give credit to this book for being a trendsetter in the way it does. But I guess my issue is that, like, I don't like to read books and caveat to be like, oh, this is a great book considering the fact that it is translated 5 times and it probably could have been a lot better if blah, 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 blah.
Sure.
Like, I mean, sometimes you just read a book and you just want it to be good, right? You watch a movie, you want it to be good. Like, you don't want to have to make excuses for it as to why it could have been better or why subpar aspects of it are subpar. But that being said, I mean, it is a great book for the 1800s. I'm sure if I were a kid in the 1800s, I'd be like, wow, this is the best sci-fi has to offer, and it's pretty damn good. But nowadays, there's just so much on tap. It's hard to say that this is like the pinnacle of science fiction.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the older a book is, right, the more entertainment we derive from doing stuff with the book and analyzing the book, and the less we derive from engaging with it or just like reading it on the surface level, right? Because it's not written for us. It's not written for our sensibilities.
True.
Right? And I think gesturing towards that. In terms of what I was just thinking, I was trying to remember like how time travel is usually depicted, and it just occurred to me that before this book, it's almost always depicted through a biological function, normally sleep. A Connecticut in King Arthur's Court by Mark Twain, right? He gets knocked on the head, unconscious, and wakes up in King Arthur's Court. There's a whole bunch of utopian novels that look forward hundreds of years, and again, it's often sleep is the way that this comes about, right? It's a one-way trip, and there's no machines involved. And I'm curious what you guys think of that contrast.
it's, we're at the late 1800s. We're at Industrial Revolution is in full swing here. So I think that makes a lot of sense to me, that we would have tremendous faith in technology being able to provide the answer for whatever our ills. So why wouldn't it be possible to do time travel? Why wouldn't it be possible to turn lead into gold? We're at the height of the British Empire at this point, so maybe optimism is booming in both the capabilities of man and also in the tools with which they are asserting their power, which is through technology at this point.
Yeah, and just the fact that the book starts with the explanation of time as the fourth dimension. And I know that this is way more allegory than science, say, even compared to Jules Verne, where it's almost everything actually happens immediately after he writes it, because he's just that on the nose with the technology. But that whole fourth dimension description is it lacks the math of it, but it is almost an exact depiction of how general relativity is devised and come up with and worked out. It's fascinating that just for his fun little allegory novel that he almost kind of plants the seed of what is the actual explanation in science that leads to these huge leaps.
I think for human beings, it's just natural to explain things that you don't understand on technology you don't understand. So it's like sleep. It's sleep is a mysterious thing. Nobody knows how it really works. Okay, sleep is how we time travel. Or people are starting to make machines. The machines can do just about anything. They can move us around. They can take us around the world. Let's make it also take us in the future. I think nowadays it's aliens, space travel. Aliens could probably abduct us and take us into the future. Or maybe, 2001 Space Odyssey. Oh, they put down obelisks to teach us a bunch of stuff. It's basically the unknown for me. I think that authors usually try to take advantage of and just be oh, well, here's a nice unknown mechanism by which I can tell my fantastical story. Let's use it.
Yeah, for sure. And definitely, again, this goes back to the trend setting thing. If this is the first time that we're seeing a man-made device instead of just I'm kind of reminded of the Stephen King novel we read, where it's not really a mechanical device that takes him through time. It's just a mysterious a step that seems to go out of his closet. It's not an explained thing. It's just a kind of a magic thing that happens instead of a mechanical thing. And the fact, and again, and this is just a look into what I think is best about the book that we're going to talk about later, but just the element of setting that as a thing that can happen for all the stuff that comes after this, for sure, is I think a big plus.
One of the things I liked a lot is just like a car where you could take the steering wheel off and nobody can steal, drive your car away. He literally just takes off the little operation handles and it's knowing that nobody can ride it through time.
No one can hack my time machine.
I also like how the Morlocks are so genetically bred to do work that they see it out there and they're oh, we got to fix it and clean it up, and they just pull it in their weird little whole mechanic shop thing.
Actually, so let's talk more about the time machine. So it so happens we have someone with us that has a lot of
Makes time machines for a living, right?
Yeah. How's that time machine coming, by the way? You working on it, John?
Oh, it's well oiled. It's ready to go.
I mean, it's where you've been the last 6 months. Is you just jumped forward in time, right?
But so let's talk about your professional opinion of the time machine, and we do have a little bit of a description of it. I don't know, Vincent, I feel like you were describing it well earlier. Do you want to talk a little bit about your...
This is unfair question.
Yeah.
Yeah. The time machine basically to me is a goddamn bicycle. It's it's light enough that when he's traveling in the future, he runs into something essentially and it falls over. And he's oh, let me stop the time machine. He's oh, ran into something. Let me pick it up. Who can pick up a time machine? I can't even pick up a go-kart. I can't pick up a small vehicle. The only thing I can pick up theoretically that would be made out of metal and be a machine is a bicycle. So the guy, all I can imagine is he's riding a bicycle and pedaling into the future with these levers. And when he gets there, he's a hipster bicyclist. And he's oh, well, I don't want the Morlocks to steal my machine. I'm going to take the front wheel off. And they're oh, shit, we can't take this time machine anywhere. It's broken. And he's I'm carrying my front wheel with me. And then later on, he's oh, I found my time machine again. He puts his front wheel on and he just pedals in the future. And the Morlocks damn it, front wheels.
I mean, what else do we have on it? There, I mean, he mentions ivory. There's ivory implementation on here along with metal, and we've got dials for the year, which apparently goes up to 802,000 at the minimum. So, John, is this a viable time machine?
I I mean,
Given those specs, can you build it by tomorrow?
by all accounts, it's obviously a perfectly sufficient time machine because it works in the book, obviously. So, as an engineer, my engineering opinion is if it works and it satisfies its function, then it's fit for duty. It's
If it
ready to
ain't
go.
broke, don't fix it.
Yeah, he traveled through time. Obviously, it works, Stavros.
That's
there
true.
You go.
So I think that I was more impressed as an engineer. I'm always looking for like the techie portions of this, and I have to say I was kind of on the side of Charlie. I think on the side of Charlie, I found his description of both time travel and his extension of what happens when you would travel through time. I found that to be more compelling than his description of the time machine, which I almost thought was just a hair better than the natural descriptions of time travel in books before this. Like, this was almost before you might have like, oh, I hit my head and I fell asleep and I've time traveled. Now it's more like I've got this magic coat. like as you were saying, this time machine, it doesn't imply any type of, it doesn't assume what type of physics would be required in order to achieve time travel, and it doesn't even make an attempt to say what type of power device would be required. Obviously not something that would be heavy or even notable, because it's not even mentioned as part of the machine. So that was a little lacking for me in general.
So you wish there was more.
No. Clearly, you have to bicycle the bike 88 miles an hour in order to time travel. That is a clearly established speed at which DeLoreans, bicycles, every type of machine goes back in time. Or in the future.
I'm pretty sure this is the screenplay for Back to the Future, is it not? Is this was the same?
This is it.
Roughly the same.
I mean, it clearly has a bicycle seat and ivory handles and a metal bar. What more do you need for time travel?
Does it have a bicycle seat though? I feel like that, just. Be
Oh, that
uncomfortable.
was in the footnotes because there's a saddle and it's like actually means bicycle seat. I was like, okay, I guess that's what the British called it in 1890.
That sounds horrible. I would not want to use this time machine.
Plenty of people like using bike Stavros. Come on, give it a chance.
He obviously didn't think that time travel was going to be particularly like dangerous, because there's not like he described it as having any type of protection around you or anything
Bicycle,
like
no
that.
airbags.
You like ride forward in parallel time or something like that, which is the sketchiest part of the time travel description. But yeah.
It'd be hilarious if he didn't actually time travel and it actually was a bike, and he just rode over to like Southampton or some random other like prefecture of Britain. And it was like, oh my god, everything's messed up over there. You would not believe it.
It's just his weird British lens of viewing the commoners is what came up with the story. He's like, and then they ate each other and they were living in caves.
I may have had a mushroom or two before I went, and everything was messed up there.
I do have to say, as an engineer, it did tickle me a little bit that the plot device that he used about sort of flickering in and out of time, and how he used that as an excuse as to why he was able to get around having physical interference with objects which of course would be occupying the same space at that time. He could travel through them, sort of. And there's this like cyclic nature to that concept, this engineering concept of dithering around a set point, allowing you to maintain stability and not necessarily go into some type of unstable state. I feel like that's something that if you opened up an engineering book about, mechanical governors or about early electrical, alternating current or something, that this would be something he'd be like, oh, I could use this as a plot device to show how I can magically get through time.
Now, was he doing the imaginary portion of time or something like that? Because I didn't do much electrical engineering in college, but I know that comes up and stuff because I knew some electrical engineers.
Yeah, he's in the imaginary portion of the...
He just went to the complex plane of time.
Yes, exactly.
I'm going to assume you guys are just talking about really smart stuff that I don't understand.
Stavros, you took math in high school. You should know this.
That was like 20 years ago.
Stavros is dating himself.
Would you get on this bicycle seat? You're like, yes, it works.
And a bicycle seat for
I've got
two.
too much to live for now. I can't be just messing around on some janky time machine. I need to
John,
a really good time
You
machine.
could go back in time, like as as someone who could theoretically use more sleep, can you imagine like, oh, I'm gonna just bike back to the beginning of the night. Like I spent way too much time playing video games. Let's just go to sleep early. Oh, that'd be so awesome.
Yeah, but you'd still age. It just means if you took advantage of that too much, like by the time you're supposed to be 40, you'd probably be like 45 or 50. Or
No, this bicycle could be built with the anti-aging function. You don't know. Your body could also travel in time.
mean, due to the physics of this book, why not?
Which dial controls the aging on the bicycle?
Oh, if I want my Eloy girlfriend to be younger or older, I turn this dial.
Oh god, we're not going back to that topic for sure.
Do you guys respect the time traveler? Like, do you think that we're supposed to respect the time traveler for this like monumental achievement?
No, I do. Well, I don't like him
What, you mean
personally,
according
though,
to-
so that's hard.
According to the author or us as like modern day readers?
I mean, both, right? Simultaneously thinking.
He's one of the most irresponsible time travelers you've ever encountered. Like many time travelers are like, oh, the consequences on like the time flow, like I could disrupt history. This guy's like, I'm just gonna show up, kill some people, find some stuff, go back in time, tell a story, like, and
Get a
okay, let's do it
girlfriend,
again.
kill her.
Yeah, let's
He
do
only
it
goes
again.
into
It's
the
like, what are you
future.
doing? You're destroying all human history. Come
Let us
on.
take her back, okay? Which is probably pretty bad as well.
So my favorite part is it's like maybe at the end of the book when he disappears, it's like maybe he went back in time to the Jurassic period. I'm like, yeah, he got eaten by a dinosaur.
I ask because that's the way these stories usually go, right? Like the inventor is a hero, right? The person, like this random amateur who is able to create some kind of amazing, scientific mechanism, is usually heralded in these stories.
That's why he doesn't have a name, because he's not a hero. You gotta have a name if you want to be a hero.
Wait, actually,
It's kind of hard to pin it down, right? Like, are we supposed to respect this guy? Are we supposed
I mean, he punches Morlocks in the face.
That probably was supposed to be awesome for the time, though. He's probably like this Arnold Schwarzenegger, like playing a time traveler inventor guy.
I mean,
He
it's
went into
exactly
the
what I said
museum. He's like, I'm going to find advanced weaponry. He's like, I found a club. I'm like, are you kidding me? Come on. Like, your museum sucks, dude.
Adrian, in the past, with this character, I guess in a story like this, if there aren't time travelers, obviously we don't have. This is sort of. If this is making precedent, for instance, in other situations, would this character normally have been exalted as like a hero for having created something like this?
I mean, the greater trend is something like, here is a resourceful British man, right, who is able to bring to bear all of the fruits of civilization to a dark place, right? So that British man is going to be innovative, is going to be brave, is going to be strong, right, and is traditionally, totally going to be heralded. And I'm just not sure, like, even for the time, like, it's hard for me to sort of suggest that this guy is supposed to be celebrated, especially because he disappears at the end, right? I think that disappearance is definitely meant to check anybody who is going to sort of completely celebrate someone creating a time travel device.
the adventure is the part that you would celebrate, like his epic encounter with the Eloys and the Morlocks, not the actual invention of the time machine or the fact that he achieved time travel. Like, even though he does it, it's still kind of talked about like some kind of cheap trick, like a true gentleman. That's not what you do with your time, but he did, and I guess you've got to go on this cool adventure.
Yeah, I feel like he's. Just let me interject. Like, I feel like he's definitely the smart guy, but like the amount of times he just loses his shit and is irresponsible in his time traveling is. I mean, it's hard to respect him, at least from the lens of looking at him from 2019, for sure.
His name should not be the time traveler. It should be like the douchebag who got a time machine.
The douchebag who invented a time machine for some reason.
He's much more like the hot tub time machine kind of time traveler as opposed to the official time traveler.
Oh, no.
On the record, why do you guys dislike him so much?
I think just because he's just a d-bag and he's just not respectful.
Well,
and
I mean, I wouldn't
Flies off the
necessarily say he's like a d-bag on purpose. He comes across maybe kind of like a doc from from the Back to the Future series, kind of like an absent-minded, kind of nutty professor kind of guy. He's like, oh my god, I put like 500% into making this time machine, and now that I'm writing it, I'm not a social scientist. I'm not a politician. I don't know about like how to behave.
I'm not
myself.
qualified for this, but I'm doing
I'm just
it.
I'm just a scientist, and this is kind of cool. And so he gets there. He's like, "Well, I gotta back some matches. And I know how to swing a baseball bat. Like I'm gonna do my shit." Like, so like I think he's just like out of his depth. So I wouldn't necessarily say that he's a D-bag per se, like on purpose. It's not like he's like, I'm gonna go and like, you know, like my goal is to hook up with chicks from like every century in the future. It's like, okay, yeah, you're kind of D-bag. But this guy's like, no, let me just see what's going out there. And if I happen to mess it up, like, oops. Like, he's just a very careless guy. I mean,
I think I'm going to go toe-to-toe with you on this one, Vince, because I
let's go, John.
I disagree. He is not at all like Doc from Back to the Future, because the Doc, you go through all three movies, he's constantly talking to Marty about the consequences of time travel and the grave dangers of running into your mom or your dad or altering the timeline and all these kinds of consequences. This guy's not concerned at all about consequences. And in fact, to get back to what Adrian was saying, does this book possibly set another precedent for the irresponsible scientist using technology and perhaps like, you know, effing it up and show no moral restraint?
Well, I was going to say, Frankenstein came out way before this and set that trend, and this book clearly does not care about that. It's more just like, hey, look, he has time travel. Cool. Watch him go on this adventure. Like, the ethics of time travel and stuff like that clearly aren't even a concept in this.
I mean, the thing is, you think about a lot of scientists, like the Manhattan Project, the scientists who developed the nuclear bomb. Like, there's a lot of science out there, like CRISPR technology nowadays, where they reverse engineer like babies and stuff like that, and they like genetically modify them. It's like people make technology as a scientist, and they're like, we trust that this is an objective tool. Like I've made gunpowder. Don't hold me responsible for whatever you want to do with gunpowder, but I made gunpowder, right? Like I feel it's like one of those things. It's like the scientist makes something. He's like, well, I don't know what the ramifications are going to be on social, like, you know, on the society, but I'm gonna make it because that's what scientists do. Like, let me push the boundaries. You could argue that a lot of scientists out there are actually technically amoral in terms of like, well, how could you make a nuclear weapon? Don't you know it's going to kill people? Like, there's no way that, you know, you thought that like blowing up nuclear substances was going to be used for peace. But they're like, oh, it's science and people need us to do it. I'm going to do some science. It's hard.
That's true.
We can make a rocket engine and then like have a terrorist fly it directly into some place with lots of people and be like, oh shit, we should have made that rocket engine. Probably shouldn't have made all these Toyotas that people like use as roadside bombs. Like, oh, well, technology just gets misappropriated all the time.
Marty, we've got to go back to the future. You've killed your girlfriend. We have to get her back.
You set her on fire. Oh my god, Doc.
All right, so let's move on to our next segment here, where we're going to have a little bit of a contest between all of us. So there's 5 of us. What we're going to do is go through each one of us, and while using your vocation, your profession, and who you are, we're going to explain why or why not we would be welcome at this upscale dinner party that the Time Traveler is hosting in 1895 Victorian England. And then after we do that, we're going to take some votes and see who had the best explanation of either why they would be welcome or why they would not be welcome. So I will go first. You know, professionally, I'm a project manager. I'm also very white. I feel like
playing the race card.
Yeah, I'm going
my race card.
I'm going straight to the race.
Profession, not the race card. Oh, come on.
It's a little column A, a little column B. Like Time Traveler, like he's building this time machine. He probably needs a project schedule for this, and he needs to manage his resources and, you know, the trifecta of time, cost, and scope. And you know, I feel like the Time Traveler would be like, you know what, Stavros, I need someone like you at my fancy dinner party. So for those reasons, I feel like, yes, I would definitely be welcome, and I'd be witnessing to all his time travel shenanigans. So,
rebuttal here. Number one, you are a project manager for a product that would not exist at the time. So, and number 2, it's not entirely clear that your ethnicity would have qualified as white to the people who are.
Yeah.
You know what? Vote for someone else then. All right.
Oh yeah.
Go ahead, Vincent.
Let me step next. I am also going to rebut Stavros. Obviously,
this isn't about rebutting me. Oh my god.
This is a segment where we rebut Stavros. Obviously, the ideal dinner guest is not the one who gets up in his face and tries to tell him to do things differently. The ideal dinner guest is the one who's super quiet and says nothing through the entire dinner or the entire interaction that you have with the time traveler, because he is alpha dog. He wants to talk the entire time. He does not want you to do anything. So me, I'm an epidemiologist. I'm a scientist. I love to listen to people because I like to hear about your problems. I want to solve them. But back in that time, I don't think epidemiologists really had like we weren't super popular. I mean, Jon Snow did solve the cholera outbreak, and that made him really famous. But the rest of the epidemiologists, you don't hear about much of them. So honestly, I'm probably going to go show up as a homeless guy. And honestly, I don't say anything. All I do is 7 days a week, I go to these free dinner parties. I have 7 different houses I go to, and they hold weekly dinner parties. I show up, I say nothing. I listen to the guests. I say, oh, wow, awesome. And I eat their food, and I'm the best guest ever because I don't make any presumptions. I don't say they did anything wrong. Don't tell them that their time lanes are off. I'm just a nice little homeless guy, and I just eat your food and I leave.
Wow.
Best guest ever.
Wow. Okay.
Rebuttal.
Why don't you just go, John?
John, just rebut Stopper. This is the goal. Rebut Stopper.
You're a transient, and he obviously doesn't appreciate or respect moochers, so I don't think he would want you at his.
He liked the
dinner
Eloy.
party.
His girlfriend was Eloy, and she was a total moocher. He loves moochers.
Wow. So you know what, John? Why don't you give us your argument? Why would they expect you or not want you there?
Well, as a scientist, as an inventor, a machine builder, as an engineer of the time, he would, of course, believe strongly in the scientific process, and therefore he would want somebody of credible credentials to be able to substantiate and to investigate his claims about his machine being capable of these things. Also, as an engineer, you're always looking to argue the merits and all the pros and cons of a certain design, how something might be made better. So obviously he would want a fellow engineer and inventor to be there so he could talk at a sophisticated level about his designs and his invention.
Okay.
That's why I would be there.
Yeah. Okay. You would certainly be there then. Okay. Charlie, do you want to go next?
3 points. So first, just like John, he wants someone there to just be like, agree with his stuff, except I don't have engineering background. I just have vague math physics background, so he would do all the explaining. I'd be like, no, sounds like plausible, sounds about right, which I feel like is all he really needs.
Okay.
Step 2, considering Adrian's definition of British as people, definition of white people, I would barely qualify, even though I am at some point part English, so I feel like out of all of us in there,
Would you call yourself a Morlock? Or
I mean, as we were discussing before, that's about as close to a title I feel like most of us can claim to in the current day environments and lives.
Okay.
Yeah, and also, most importantly, I would listen to a story, and just like all our books, I'd be like, that sounded good, I liked it.
All right, Adrian, let's have your argument.
Okay, so I'm gonna go with the cons first, like a reason why you shouldn't pick me, then I'll get into the good.
why you shouldn't pick me?
Is that what you're arguing then? Why you shouldn't? He would not want you there?
There's nobody left to rebuttal, so he's going to rebut himself, and then he's going to go into it.
John's gonna win. So I'm gonna get into this. Number one is that the novel study, as we understand it, didn't exist at the time this book was taking place. Right? So they wouldn't recognize my area of expertise. People still thought oftentimes that novels were kind of like corrupting influences on. Right, they're a waste of time. So, not that I even really study novels, but still, it's a problem at the time. So that wouldn't speak to my qualifications, right?
Okay.
On the pro side, like this is actually an area that I'm an expert in. Like, study this time period and the time period immediately following, so I could tell them what the future was going to be like. So that's probably good, right?
Okay, interesting. All right, so let's do some voting. So, FYI, you cannot vote for yourself. So I'm going to go first. John, I was almost taken by your explanation of being like a helping hand for this guy, but I feel like this time traveler is kind of a jerk anyway. I feel like he would not want your professional opinion. He would be like, "Get the hell out of my house." So wow. I think I'm going with the transient sitting in the back eating free food.
Yeah, freeloader.
Just because that sounds amazing. Anyway, Vincent, you're up next. Who are you going with?
I think he does like the idea of freeloaders and quiet people, and I think that Charlie would probably fit that bill the best. Are you okay, Charlie? I'm just kidding, Charlie. I'm just kidding. But I do think.
I don't deny it.
Charlie is a very good yes man in terms of when it comes down to scientific principles. He has principles outside. He puts his foot down when he doesn't agree with things. But when it comes down to science, anything is possible with Charlie, which this guy would appreciate.
He has no spine when it comes to science.
Damn. Okay. I mean,
not anything is possible.
He's a science hoe. He's a science reasonable. Anything's on the table.
All right, John. Where are you putting your vote?
I'm also putting my vote firmly with Charlie because I think that he would also be able to provide that, like, he'd be able to say something. The time traveler would say something like, "Oh, time travel works like this, and the machine should be built like that. What do you think, Charlie?" And Charlie would say, "Yes, of course, I agree with that. That sounds great." And I think that would basically give him the air of credibility, because obviously, Charlie is knowledgeable of these things, but provide no explanation, provide no actual input or.
Okay, Charlie, what's your vote?
My vote goes for John for like actually putting an input, because I think, as John said, his time machine works, so clearly it works, and John's input would be like, it works because it works, right? Right. I'd be like, sounds about right, and then put another dinner roll in my mouth, and that'd be my participation.
Okay, how about you, Adrian? Where's your vote here?
It's gotta go to
Here we
John.
are.
Right? Because, I mean, like, the time traveler clearly has a kind of like mechanical fetish, right? Like the only thing that will keep him off of Lena is like these machines that are in the museum. So I feel like John is the only person here who can really kind of fulfill that in him.
Wow. Okay. So after 5 people vote, we have a tie between John and Charlie. I'm gonna have to reschedule my vote here. John, he just doesn't give a fuck about what you think about his shit. He's gonna tell you to get out. So I'm gonna have to go with Charlie on this one. So
that's good. I don't want to be there anyway, so that's fine. That's okay. That's all right.
Charlie's the only one who wants to be there.
Well done.
That you want us to read, you get to be permanently part of it. We're sending you back in time. You're going to go sit at dinner for the rest of your life with this guy.
I mean, so what would my title be as unnamed character number 5?
Oh, that's a great question.
You could be, it's like you'd be newspaper guy and medical man. You'd be like dinner roll boy or something like that. You'd just be like, oh,
Yeah, that's about right.
He's not even a man. You made him a boy? Come on, Stavros.
Oh, geez. Okay, well, so let's go to our wrap-up segment. Best thing, worst thing. Things you liked about the book, things you didn't like about the book. I will go first. The best thing I liked about this, as I mentioned in our topics, just the fact that it's trend-setting. I feel like we would not have science fiction in the same way in the 20th century and beyond that we did without this book existing, just because of the time machine and time traveling, even though it's crazy and all over the place. Which brings me to the worst thing, like, the entropy stuff and just the depiction of the future, and the fact that the time traveler is just makes these. I mean, he pops out in one place in the future and then is like, I have existed in this time for 1 hour. I know what happened. I'm just like, oh, Jesus. And just the entropy death of the Earth. Just too hard for me to get over it from the lens of 2019. So I'm going to have to go with that as the best and worst thing. So let's go to Vincent. What do you think?
I think the best part of the book is actually the very beginning of the book when he's describing how time travel would work. Like, you can travel like to the left, to the right, up and down, but time is another plane in which you could travel theoretically. I liked how clear he was in the beginning about describing time travel. The rest of the book got decidedly unscientific and a little bit more like, let's have an adventure.
Like pulpy, yeah.
Yeah, kind of pulpy, but in the beginning, it started out kind of solid, and I was like, "Oh, this is kind of actually not too bad." I could kind of get along with it, logically. I could follow along with it. So I definitely appreciate how he distilled down the idea of time travel and made it interesting for the readers back in the 1800s. It definitely sets the ground for an appetite for science fiction into later generations. I guess the part that I like the least is just because it's nothing to do with the author. It's more that the fact that the writing style and the target audience is not me. It is a little bit dated.
What?
It travels a little bit slowly. It's a little bit unbelievable. There are aspects to it which, if you put it this way, they're remaking all the Disney movies and stuff like that. If they remade Time Machine, I'm sure they could add levels of nuance to it that would make it oh, this is awesome. Not to say that I, Robot the movie was actually an improvement on I, Robot the book, because I would argue that. But I feel like there is room for it to be updated into a modern day era kind of thing. And to a certain extent, every time I see a time travel movie, a lot of them are kind of predicated on the original Time Machine book. So I do have to say that even though it is a con that his version of the Time Machine is not as awesome as many of the versions of time travel that we see nowadays, we all stand on the shoulders of giants. So I do applaud the author in terms of his work in creating a visionary piece of literature.
Okay, Adrian, why don't you give us your pros and cons?
My pro here is that I really love how much the time traveler worries about communism.
That is true.
I'm actually very serious
That is
about that. I think that like our narrative of the Cold War like makes us kind of feel like communism kind of erupted in 1946 or maybe during the First World War, and we sort of ignore the fact that communism was a really kind of had a very persistent existence during this time period. You know, that there were so many concerns about communist uprisings leading up to the First World War, and it's kind of cool to watch this guy like go from loving communism to hating it, essentially, right?
Yeah.
In terms of things I disliked, Weena,
Yes.
who is, essentially, an Aboriginal character, right, in one of these other boys' novels, right? So a character who was meant to kind of just like cast the time traveler as like a civilized, capable individual in juxtaposition with this kind of very simple, kind of purely passionate and ultimately dominated figure.
And also he kills her.
Yeah, I was about to say, like, that's the saddest thing in the book. It's like, oh, look at this little character. I can take care of her, and I got her eaten by Morlocks, or hopefully she just died in the fire, and I can feel better about that. It's like,
hey, he wanted to take her back to his time, which, again, I don't know how you feel about, but actually, to
Very
him,
strange.
felt like something good.
Never was there a tale of more woe than that of the time traveler and his Weena.
Oh, jeez.
Weena was in the jungle.
Oh, my God.
So, how did he come with the name Weena?
He's just making up names. He's just making
why
up
is it Weena?
Morlocks.
I in the footnotes it said it's probably like a sad, pathetic version of Moena, which is like a traditional British style name.
No. Hey, Weena, you want to see something I got? I'll show you.
No. Adrian, please continue.
So I was done. Like,
Okay, I got.
None of that is on me.
All right, John, give us your pros and cons, your best thing and worst thing.
I'm going to mirror a lot of the same points. I kind of like the beginning of the book where he was explaining the concept of a fourth dimension in time. I really liked some of the plot devices around the time machine and how it moved through space. I liked that part. I hated his intellectual elitism. I hated he was oafish and violent, and he had complete disregard for for other cultures, for native cultures. Just complete irresponsibility. He was an oafish, terrible character. It makes me sad that that's what British society was like at the peak of the empire, and I sort of think to myself, ooh, dude, if that's how empires sort of develop, that's how the people's mindset gets. What does that say about America? So, just leaving it at that, I really thought he was a detestable character. So that was a really tough part of the book. For 90% of the book was that, so that was hard.
Yeah,
hard to get through.
Did anyone actually like him, by the way?
Yeah, I'm really curious about this because I think that really kind of... I'm curious if people believe that he was meant to be detestable.
I don't think he was meant to be. I think it's just a hero out of... It's just reading in what is supposed to be... It's like what John said. It's like, it's just out of time.
Yeah.
Because I kind of think he is, or at least that could be read that way. Because again, like if the British hero is meant to be kind of always capable, always prepared, this guy is not prepared at all, right?
That's
like
true.
He wastes his matches, right? Like I think if you're going to read a kind of critique of British society and this kind of the end of history argument, right, that the British have kind of civilized the world to the point that this future is now possible, right? That the time traveler is part of that. To a great extent, right? That he is kind of the early warning, the canary in the coal mine, that something is wrong with the way that we're leading our society.
Interesting.
Yeah,
I like that view. That's interesting. Because he does get his native friend killed, which wouldn't be what typically happens in these types of stories. Like you said, the boys' novels type things.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it sucks they don't really dwell on it at all.
Well, now he went back in time and got eaten by a dinosaur, so everything turned out great.
Yeah. I mean, I like to pretend that he went forward in time and actually saved Weena from the Force, but as I was going to say, one of the things I find interesting is this is written before so many sci-fi conventions that, that's not even a conceit to the plot. The fact that he has time travel and, could potentially undo events or explain why he can't.
Yeah. No temporal paradoxes in this one.
Yeah.
They do talk about it though in the beginning, right? Like whether or not you would have seen the time machine or like a person like earlier in the week if that person had.
Yeah,
That's
there's a little
right.
bit.
Yeah, it does kind of provide an explanation, which is it's the like in physics, it's the time is consistent. So if time travel exists, any time travel that went to the past before now did happen, and that is our past. And it seems to go with that. So it's like, it doesn't explain it in the book, but the idea is if Lena died, she's dead, and no matter what he does, she stays dead.
Well, that would have to be explained in a whole nother episode since we are basically out of time for now, unfortunately.
Science.
So, as usual, if you, the reader, have feedback or suggestions on books we should read and discuss, you can reach us at subplotacourse@gmail.com or on Twitter at subplotpodcast. And for September, next month, we are going to be reading Accelerando by Charles Stross and published in 2005. Say goodbye, everybody.
Matter what the book says, the Earth is probably not going to fall into the sun before the sun explodes and eats everything.